time right after the war in the 50s that anti-Semitism was a really big thing happening in Italy. And in southern Italy, where he was, near Sicily, mafia country, it was bad. And he grew up in that kind of an environment. And at some point, my grandparents decided that the economy in Italy was bad, and they were going to leave, and they wanted to go to North America. And they ended up in Toronto. And even though they ended up in Toronto, I don't know, has anybody here ever been to Toronto? Yes?
Yeah.
Yeah? All right. So the city itself is pretty much like a lot of North American cities. It's divided into kind of like Little Italy, Chinatown, Little Portugal, all the little areas that were kind of cultural centers for the people that came over. And my dad grew up in Little Italy there. So even though he grew up in Toronto, he grew up in a very closed-knit almost and a very closed-minded community when it came to Jews. He grew up, like I say, Italian, Catholic. He was born into a Catholic family. And I tell that because many years later, when DNA started to come around and we were able to start to actually do our DNA testing and things like that, we knew my mom's story more or less, but what was interesting is we wanted to find out my dad's story. And when we did DNA, I mean, we didn't know what it was going to come back, but we never expected it to come back that my father actually was Jewish. He was ethnically Jewish. And we decided to do a trick. We wanted to go back to Italy and actually find out, well, what was the history behind it? Why all of a sudden now, how did this come about? It was such a rare thing to find, especially in southern Italy, that a Jew who was ethnically Jewish really had no idea what his background was or really had no kind of connection to what it was that his family was. And when we went back, we actually met with a rabbi in Venice. There was a big synagogue there, and this wonderful rabbi who does all this Jewish history and kind of looks back at old lineage, specifically when it comes to the Spanish Inquisition. And what we found out about my dad's family was that he was one of the families that was in Spain during the Spanish Inquisition that was kicked out of Spain, way back when in 1492. His family's journey went from Spain to Portugal, Portugal to Morocco, Morocco, Tunisia, Sicily. And then they ended up in the mainland. So very similar to what my mom's was, but he never knew. And what we found interesting was the percentage. He was almost 90% ethnically Jewish. What was interesting was we thought, well, how, after all those years, after all those generations, could he still be that high in terms of ethnicity and percentages? And the rabbi told us that Jews that were kicked out of Spain in 1492, as many other times were the pogroms or whatever it was, they were very careful to be able to keep their Judaism intact in terms of the way in which they interacted with their community, but they were able to keep it a secret. So what had happened was generationally, they knew that we had to marry into this family, or we had to marry into that family. In many Muslim countries, there's things called chamunot, which are like families, and they know that certain families marry with certain families don't marry with certain families, and it's usually a genetic thing. But with my dad, they never really knew. A lot of times in Jewish history, they don't know. They used to do things, they used to light candles in the basement at night on Friday night, but they never knew why. There were all these things that they used to do that now we understand why and why it makes sense, but it was interesting to see that after all those years, the families, even though they had been generation and generation and generation in the country that they were in this case Italy, they knew that they needed to marry within the other Jewish kind of communities with other Jewish families in order to protect their Jewish identity without really knowing why they were doing it. And I found that fascinating. And the reason that I start with that story is because even though the Jewish history is a rich, vibrant, crazy history. We have been all over the place. Jews are all over the diaspora. And what's interesting about it is even though from the day we all left our first place, which was of course Israel, we always had a yearning to go back. Always had a yearning to go back. Our national anthem in Israel is called the Tikva, the hope. The hope is talking about the yearning of wanting to go back home for all the thousands of years that we can go back. And that is why I like to start with my family's history, because it brings us into how I grew up. I grew up in a very Zionist family. And I say that here in Europe, and all of a sudden people start looking at me weird, as if the term Zionism is a bad thing. And I grew up knowing and understanding what Zionism was in terms of what the definition is. So the definition of Zionism is the right of the Jewish people to self-determination in our indigenous homeland. Nothing more, nothing less. In my time that I've been traveling around the UK, I've heard many things. I've heard it's colonialism, I've heard it's racism, I've heard it's just all these things that it's not. And I don't know where along the line, where along in the history we kind of let it go and allow these new definitions to kind of come into kind of attach themselves to what Zionism truly is. But I say that because I think as a Jewish people and as a community, we have a responsibility to take back the original meaning. We shouldn't be allowing people to skew the meaning to something that it's not, and make it almost into like a dirty word, which it has become. So, grew up in a very Zionist home. Even though my family traveled back and forth from Israel, I spent years in Israel, I spent years abroad in Canada, I always knew, and my family always knew, that I was going to go to the army at the age of 18, because every Israeli knows that they go to the army at the age of 18. For me, it was a little bit different because I had spent so many years outside of Israel, and even though I went to an Israeli school my entire life, outside of Israel as well, I still had friends who did not, and they all thought that that was weird, especially in Canada. Canada wasn't even like the US. It was a very kind of peaceful country. To be honest, I don't even know how big the Canadian armed forces are. It's not a big deal in Canada. And for my family, it was a big deal. My family, it was a big deal that at 18, when all my friends were going to be going to university, I was going to go serve. And that was something that I was always very proud of. It was something that I always knew that I wanted to do. But I wanted to do it in a way that made sure that I gave the most that I possibly could to my country. That was important to me. But because I had lived so many years outside of Canada, I understood the value of education in terms of, not that Israelis don't, but we understand that at 18, we go to the army, we worry about university after. I didn't want that 3-year period that I was in the army, doing my army service, to be something that was going to, I didn't want my mind to go to mush, basically. And sometimes some of the jobs that you can do are so kind of mundane and, you're just kind of like doing the motions that your mind a little bit goes to mush, and it gets a little bit hard to go back to university after all those years that you're not in school. So I wanted to do something that was going to pair making sure that I was giving the most that I possibly could to my country, but I wanted to make sure also that my mind was going to stay intact. And I decided that I was going to do Handasa Kavit. Handasa Kavit is combat engineering. So what is combat engineering? Combat engineering basically means in a time of war, God forbid, I would have to deal with explosives, detonating, putting together, detonating mines, building bridges against terrains. If there are tanks that need to go over certain terrains, an engineer would build a bridge to bridge those two terrains. So it was something that was interesting. I learned a lot. I learned a lot in kind of a field that I had absolutely no background in. I was always very art-centric. And for me, this was something totally new. It was really interesting, and it was super challenging, and I loved it. I loved every minute of it. That was in a year that Israel saw one of the most tumultuous, if not the most tumultuous thing happen in all of its history. I'm going to throw it a day. Let's see who knows what it is. November 4th, 1995. Really? Nobody? Okay. It was the day that Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated. He knew it. He knew it. Yeah, no, that's okay, no worries. So November 4th, 1995, our prime minister was assassinated. And that was a big deal, a huge deal, obviously, because he was assassinated. But Israel has always been a country that it didn't matter if you were left, if you were right, if you were central. Everybody was always, you could talk about politics and you could fight with everybody from now until the end of time, and then we'd go sit and have dinner and everything would be fine. That's just the way Israelis are. When this happened, this was a huge wake-up call for Israel, both left and right. People didn't understand that there was such a hatred brewing in society, and it flipped the country on its head. That was November 4th, 1995. November 5th, 1995 was the day that I went into the army. So, being everything that was going on, everything that was happening there was being such a tumultuous time in the country, we didn't know if it was going to be a regular service. There were people talking about possible civil wars. It was a very uncomfortable, uncertain time. And I went into the army. Everything in the end, obviously, as you know, it happened. We moved forward as much as we could. And I started my basic training. That was in 1995. February 25th, 1996 was the next day that, for me, completely changed my life. It was the day that my life was going this way, and after that day was going this way. I had very good friends who went to school with me. As I said, I was studying in an Israeli school, also abroad, and they also came back to do their army service. My parents were still traveling between the two countries. So sometimes they were there, sometimes they weren't. During my basic training, at some point, there was a time that my parents were outside of the country, so I was what was called Chayal Boded, which means a lone soldier. A lone soldier basically means that you don't have your parents there. You could have other family there, and I did. I had my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, but I didn't have my parents there. And they wanted, they want to be able to take care of you, especially knowing that you don't have, let's say, for example, on Friday night, you don't have anywhere to go, so they say, we'll set you up with a family. I wasn't that disconnected from, from my immediate family as well as from my cousins and my aunts, so I always had somewhere to go. But this weekend, this one particular weekend, my friend Avishai, who I studied with, his parents said, why don't you come to our place? You come to our place for Shabbat in Jerusalem. They moved back to Jerusalem. And I went to their place, and we spent Shabbat. Now, Avishai was a little bit younger than me, or is a little bit younger than me, and he didn't have to go into the army as quickly as I did. So I was already in basic training. He hadn't started his service yet. And if you know anything about any army, not necessarily just Israel, but probably the Israeli army is like, everybody knows that when you're in the army, Sunday morning comes, if you are late, and I'm talking like a minute, if you're a minute late when you go ahead to basic training, you are staying that next Saturday, you're missing your weekend. They're not letting you go home. And for an 18-year-old who just lost all of their freedom that they had before they got into the army, looks forward to that weekend like nothing. It doesn't matter what happens during that week, you're just looking for Friday. You're looking for Friday to come. And my biggest fear is that I was going to be late. So Avishai didn't have to wake up early that morning. His parents woke up and said, okay, this is what you need to do. This is how you need to get to where you need to get to. And I had to get to the central bus station. So I went downstairs, packed all my stuff, had my big backpack on me. And I was running to get the bus. I missed it. And it was the most frustrating thing to me because I knew at that moment it didn't matter what bus I was going to get on. After that, I was going to get there late. And I was going to have to stay the next week. I was trying to think in my mind, how am I going to do it? I was so angry. And I remember standing on the street just cursing at that bus driver, thinking, I cannot believe I missed the bus, literally seconds. Got on the bus after that, the bus that came behind it, that didn't get exactly to where I needed to go, but it was close enough, and I thought maybe I could run. As we were driving, maybe 15 seconds in, the bus that I just missed exploded. And I remember, every time I tell this story, I still get shivers, because when I tell the story, my mind's eye, I can still see everything, I can smell everything, I can hear the screams, I can smell the burnt hair, I can see the limbs, I can see the horrible, horrible situation in front of my eyes, and I can sense the fact that I literally missed it by seconds. And that changed my life completely. Absolutely completely, as you can imagine. It's a very traumatic thing to see. It's even more traumatic to know that you were supposed to be on that bus. Maybe not. Maybe I wasn't supposed to be on that bus. But it became such an important point in my life that I decided that it needed to be time that I was honest with who I was, with my army mates, with my brothers in arms, and that meant I had to tell them that I was LGBT. Now, in 1996, when I came out, it was still don't ask, don't tell in Israel. There was never really a time in my lifetime that I can remember that in the center part of Israel, where people are a little bit more cosmopolitan and a little bit more worldly, I don't ever remember a time where it was scary to be gay, but it certainly wasn't accepted. And there was times that we'd be walking in the street, and you'd get snide marks, or people would sometimes spit, but never something that I felt danger. I remember thinking, I am in a combat brigade. I now have to go back, and there's don't ask, don't tell. My entire life growing up, this is what I wanted to do when I was in the army, be in this specific kind of combat thing, something that really meshed the two things that I wanted to do. I'm going to go back now. I'm going to tell them, that's it. They're either going to kick me out, I'm going to lose my friends. They, for me, and I was telling you before, my family, my parents used to travel, they, for me, were family in many ways. They were like my brothers. We came back every week. We spent the entire week together. Sometimes we would even, go to each other's houses on the weekend because we were that close. And my fear was, I'm going to tell them, and then that's going to be it. Every Sunday, all the guys get back to the base, as you can imagine, and think about it. Probably similar to what locker room talk is. There's who'd you go out with? I met this girl. I did this with this, and I went here, and I went to this club, and all these things. And always, Shai was always the one that was quiet. Well, what'd you do this weekend? Stay home. I didn't feel well. Headache. All these things. I didn't know what to say. But I mean, how many weeks can you possibly say that? We were like getting into months, and it was weird. So this time, we came back around, and I was like, okay. I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna, like a Band-Aid, I'm just gonna pull it off. I was like, it's gonna be done, and I'm just gonna get it done. Whatever happens, the cards will fall where they fall. And we came back, and again, they were talking about, yeah, I went to this, and I saw her, and I whatever, and then I went to her friend, and all these things. And then I said, well, Shai, what'd you do this week? And I said, okay, guys. I said, listen. I said, my heart was pounding. I said, I have something to tell you. I want to be able to tell you something. They looked at me, and they said, what? So they said, well, they were talking about all their friends and who you meet. And they said, well, who did you meet? Are you going to tell us that you met somebody? And I was like, well, kind of. And they were like, okay, who was it? Who is she? Who is she? Can we see a picture? I was like, no, there's no real picture. And I said, I'm gay. And it got quiet for about 3 seconds. And then my friend told me, looked at me, and he's like, so did you meet guys this weekend? Did you go with guys this weekend? And that was it. That was as far as it went. This whole thing that I built up in my mind, this tragedy that was going to happen, never happened. And this was 1996, so this is not a time that was like super open, but it was pretty open. It was the fact that I was in a combat unit with all these very testosterone-heavy kind of guys who were talking about specifically girls, and then now all of a sudden I'm telling them this. And it meant nothing to them. It didn't change the way they looked at me at all. It didn't change the way they thought of me at all. At least 5 of them came up and hugged me after and like, thank you for telling us. That was important. It really, it almost bonded us in a little bit of a way because I was able to be 100% honest with who I was. And that was an amazing thing. So I spent the rest of that year, in training, and there was a point when I was actually injured. And it was in Maynooth, which is an advanced training in Kildare, and we were doing we were doing something that we needed to kind of like practice on. And because we were working with explosives, there was an accident. Nobody was killed, but I was hurt, and I flew back on my back. And when you're training, you have kind of things on you. I had fallen and I had hurt my back, and I had slip discs all over my back. Some were herniated, some were slipped. They didn't really know what the deal was at the end of the day. So right away, I went to the hospital. I was in the hospital for almost 3 months. There was a very long time that I couldn't feel my legs. They didn't know what was going to happen. When you have an injury in your back, they don't know all the time until swelling goes away and until kind of like things deal with your nerves, exactly what's going to happen. Thank God everything was fine, but I spent many months after that in a rehabilitation hospital in Kildare. And I had to learn how to kind of do the things again that I kind of took for granted. My mobility became less. And then the Army said to me, well, you know what? You have to be released because you can't serve the purpose for what we brought you into the Army to do. And that for me was not an option. There was no way that I was going to, after all that I put into the Army, I was going to let the Army just release me like that, especially because I was a lone soldier for most of the time, and that meant all my friends were going to be doing it, and I was going to be the one who wasn't. And in 1996, to not do an Army service, it's not like that anymore so much in Israel, but at that time, it's a big deal not to do your service. I mean, still today in Israel, when you sit down, the first things that people ask you is, where are you from, what did you do this weekend, and where did you serve? It's just kind of like the thing. So when you don't serve, you get looked at a little bit differently. You might not get a job if it's not on. In Israel, it's on our CVs. So if it's not on your CV, why is it not on your CV? Why didn't you serve? Was it physical or was it mental? Because sometimes there's a mental component to not being able to serve. And And then people look at you differently, want to know why. Are you able then to do the job we're trying to hire you to do? So it had a lot of, there was a lot of things that could have happened had I not done it. And I was lucky enough, after I fought months and went through different medical exams, and I had to go to different doctors and this medical exam and that medical exam, and they finally said, okay, you can stay, but you cannot obviously be in the physical position that you were before. And I had to accept that as a compromise, and I did. And I was able to stay still working with my brigade, but just not being able to be combat anymore. And that was a little bit disappointing, not a little bit, it was very disappointing to me, but I was still able to fulfill my service. I was still able to do what the Army needed me to do, and that for me, that had to be able to be enough for me at that point. So after I finished my Army service, I decided that, especially after having those kind of things happen in my life, what happened in Jerusalem, what happened with my injury, what happened with all that kind of stuff, I decided that I was going to do what I had always wanted to do my entire life and study interior, what you guys call interior architecture, or in North America, it's interior design. And I thought, though, I'm not type A personality. I got to always do something like, it's always got to be here. It can't just be like half. So I thought, well, where am I going to study? I could study in Israel, but that's not the best. Where's the best? And the best was, in my mind, was either in Paris or was in New York. And French, I can say like croissant, and that's it. So it was going to be New York. So I decided I'm going to go to New York, but as a person who comes from outside of the United States to go study in the United States, you need to be like Donald Trump. You need to be super rich. I'm not even coming from state to state. If you live in California and want to go study in New York, it's still super expensive. So when you come as an international student, it's crazy. But it was something that I wanted to do, and I wasn't going to let myself not do it. So I took out student loans so much. I took out $100,000 worth of student loans. That's as much as I paid over my entire lifetime. And I just finished paying them almost 7 years ago. I don't know how it works. Is education free here?
So cheaper. It can be subsidized.
Subsidized? Nice. Yeah, no, it wasn't subsidized. But I mean, on the one hand, obviously I wish I didn't have to pay it, but on the flip side, it really made me value the fact that I completed the degree and I did what I wanted to do. Towards the end of my degree, I was also working in a coffee shop. And there was this one Orthodox Jewish lady who used to come in all the time, and we used to talk every morning. And I used to work that early morning shift because then I had to go to school. And she used to come in and she used to talk. And there was a point when her husband's family, someone in her husband's family, had passed away. And they inherited a home in Brooklyn. And it was in this closed Orthodox kind of gated community. And she said to me, listen, it's this old home. His family lived in it for years. We don't really love it. But, if you feel like, maybe you want to help us, we would love for you to help us. And I thought to myself, I jumped on it. Stupidly, I said, you don't have to pay me. Stupid now. But I said, yeah, no worries. I was like, I don't care. I was like, I'll just do it because I just want to have something for my portfolio. So I started to help her, and really it was the smartest thing I ever did because in that closed gated community got me different jobs within that community, which was surprising, by the way, because I was open and openly LGBT then, and in an Orthodox community, they knew it and they knew about me, and nobody had an issue with it, as long as I didn't, I wasn't trying to kiss their sons and stuff like that, so it was fine. It was stupid thing. So I did my thing. I was then offered, that opened a door to me, I was offered an opportunity by an American company who was looking to transfer their business also into Canada. And it was a perfect opportunity for me. So it was a design company called Price, and they had hired me, not Price, K-R-E-I-S-S, and they were out of California, and they were looking for a design director to be in Toronto, to be in kind of their Canadian market. So they did hire me, and I moved up to Toronto, and I started to work for them. And as that time, and when I was working for them, I was also doing a little bit of art consulting. And as I was doing that art consulting, I had met somebody who, at that time, I didn't know exactly who he was, but turned out he was, I like to call him my career angel. His name is Jordan Schwartz. He was, or is, one of the biggest producers of television in Canada. And I was doing some art consulting for him, and he said to me, hey, would you ever consider doing television? Yeah, I was like, who doesn't want to do TV? So I did a screen test, and I got the job. And the job was to be a design expert for, at that time, was Canada's biggest and longest running national television show, which is called Cityline, which is a lifestyle show. So basically, it's, every day has a different topic. Mondays is around the house, Tuesdays, I think, is family. The days that I deal with are predominantly Thursday, which is home day, and Fridays, which is fashion Fridays. And I became an expert on the show. And that meant that each Thursday and Friday I would go to the show and we would do these segments. And basically, I don't want to call it a co-host, but it was almost like a co-host to the host who's there permanently. And that was a great opportunity for me. It opened up a world for me that otherwise I would have never, ever been introduced to, because it gave me a public platform. And that was only in Canada. So Canada's a huge country land-wise, but it's a very small country in terms of the amount of people and population. Think about it. As big as Canada is, there's only 35 million people who live in Canada. In the US, there's 380 million people in a landmass that's even smaller than ours. So we had a viewership of about, I think it was 5 million, which was a big deal in Canada. I think it was 4 years ago, 3 years ago, we became syndicated in the US. So my viewership now is 70 million homes across North America. And this opened up a huge, huge platform to me. And the reason that I tell you guys that is because I tried to figure out a way. I began to understand that my platform could no longer just be about interior design or fashion or kind of like the fun stuff. I had to be able to use my platform if I was a responsible person, if I was a responsible Israeli, if I was a responsible Jew. I had to be able to use my platform also to be able to educate people as when it comes to anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism, and we'll talk about the difference in those two things in a minute. But I had to be able to use it, and if I didn't use it, it was irresponsible on my part. That's the way I felt. So in 2013, and this is even before we became syndicated in the US, I had the amazing opportunity. My producers were like godsends. I begged for months, let me take a camera crew. I want to go back to Israel with a camera crew. I want to take them. I want to show our viewers Israel, not through the political microscope that everybody sees on CNN, on BBC, on Sky News, on whatever. I want to show them Israel through my eyes. Well, the logistics and the here and the there. I got the Israeli consulate in Toronto to foot the bill for everything, so nobody had to pay for anything. We would just go and do it. And the Israeli consulate was so amazing about it because I thought, they're going to want me to they're going to try to build the trip for me. What I wanted to do was more than they were happy with. And I wanted the trip to be, obviously I wanted to be able to show people kind of like the cool things that Israel has to offer in terms of tourist stuff, but I wanted the trip to be specifically like I go back every year. And I go back every year, I go back home. I spend a month in the summer, always I go back home. And I wanted the trip to be just, what I do. If I decided to go to the beach that day, then we went to the beach. If I decided to go to a friend's house that day for dinner, then, we kind of learned about local cooking at my friend's house. It was that kind of a deal. And when we came back, we didn't know how it was going to be received. I mean, with Israel, sometimes you never know. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be political. Still, sometimes you don't know how it's going to be received. And it was interesting because we never got so many emails saying, well, we had no idea that's what Israel was like. We think war, politics, the Israel-Palestinian conflict, that's all people see, and that's all people know. And that's sad to me because we are a complete country, a society. We are civilians. We obviously we serve, but we are civilians, and we have an entire community that lives life every day. So why is it people are always looking at us through this little political microscope when there's so much more to offer? And this was my first opportunity to be able to do that. So I thought, this is great. I saw that, there was a great response, and people were really enjoying what I was doing. So I thought, well, it'll give me an opportunity to now start using my social media also for things, maybe I want to talk about things about Israel. My manager at that time said to me, listen, we're okay with you using your social media to, talk about the things you want to talk about, but we're asking you to keep the, if you want to say something political about Israel, keep it to like one. Choose one that's your thing, and then let that be your private thing. And I thought, okay, for that I'm going to do Facebook. I said Twitter, which is like a hotbed of hate, I'm going to leave it open. I said, Instagram is about design and pictures. I said, I'm going to leave that open. I said, Facebook, I can, it's my friends, and I can do whatever. So 2014 comes. What happened in 2014? Yes. So Operation Protective Edge, it's done. Happens. The war happens in Gaza. Now, I've said this to you already, but I preface and remind you by saying that I work in Canada, be in an industry that's considered media, and C, it's also a very liberal industry. So Canada's pretty good about Canada is in general very supportive of Israel, the government. The people, depending on where you are in the country, could be, could not be. Toronto's a pretty liberal, as big cities tend to be. It's a pretty liberal society. In 2014, the war starts, and one of the tipping points, one of the big things about that war, obviously, was the 3 young teenagers who were kidnapped and killed by Hamas and then thrown into a ditch in the West Bank. And I remember the day I woke up and I was watching it, and then as I had promised my manager and the producers, I was only going to post something on Facebook. And I did, and I posted, about them and what had happened to them. And it was, it was such a, I remember sitting the day just watching the news, and of course I would stream the news. I didn't like to watch CNN because it had a very washed lens over what was happening. I would stream the news from back home. And I watched it, and I thought to myself, I have to be able to say something and let people know what's going on, because I was seeing the way that CNN was spinning things, and I thought, no. We have to be a little bit more honest about what's happening. And I posted on Facebook about the 3 boys that were kidnapped. One of the people who works with me, who still works with me today, she's a producer, who shall remain nameless, as I promise. I had posted a thing about the 3 young boys, and she had sent me a private message, and she said to me, I want to let you know something. I'm going to have to, I feel like as though you and I shouldn't be friends on Facebook anymore. I'm like, well, okay, why? And she said, well, because the thing that you posted now about the 3 young boys is not true. It's propaganda. Never happened. And I said, what? I was like, what are you talking about? First of all, I was like, I don't even know where you're bringing that information from. I said, I can tell you that the mother of one of them is actually somebody that my aunt knows. So I don't know. Nope, never happened. I have somebody in my family who works in The Hague. Okay, so what does that have to do with Israel? Well, I know a lot more than what a lot of other people know. So I thought to myself, well, you know what? You're either completely ignorant or someone is feeding you something. So I thought, well, maybe I can try to talk to you and try to explain. She wasn't having it. She didn't want to hear it. She didn't want to know about it. Nothing. And she did. She took me off from Facebook right after that kind of direct message chat that we had. And it was upsetting to me in many ways, but it was most upsetting to me because this woman who had worked with me for it's now 5 years, who knew who I was Israeli, who watched the footage from when we brought it back from Israel, who never had ever said anything to me about her views or her thoughts when it came to Israel, and this was my first taste of what her views were, and I was shocked by it. Because it was so completely ignorant based on nothing other than she says she has a family who works in The Hague. And I didn't know how to deal with that. It brought something into my workplace that I didn't want to have in my workplace. It brought this feeling of you are looking at something that is so important to me, something that defines me, who I am, where I'm from, my people. You're looking at it through this bizarre lens of somebody who doesn't really know, who just you hear stuff and you've decided to make your own conclusion, but never asking me about it. Never saying, Shai, I'm really interested to know what your thoughts are on it, because I know you for like 4 years. Never, not once. And that upset me. And what also happened in 2014 is because I had that social platform and that kind of public platform, I began, it was probably about 3 weeks of constant, non-stop death threats to my family. We're going to put a bomb under your car. We're going to come to the studio. We're going to kill you when you come out.
It was longer than 3 weeks.
Yeah, no, as people were attacking me. Yeah. Well, they still attack me. Yeah, you're right. They still attack me. But it was like a 3 week period of like non-stop. And it was during the summer, of course, and then I went back home. Not towards, it wasn't over yet, but it was towards the end. And when I had gone back home, I started to get messages. And this is why I say Twitter is like a hotbed of hate. I don't know if when I landed in Israel, my Twitter was like more open or something. I don't know what happened, but all of a sudden I started to get these messages from countries like Saudi Arabia and Iran with pictures of me. People took pictures of me and spliced my face with Hitler, took pictures of me and spliced my face with dogs. It was, I had to put my Twitter on private for almost a week because I just had to, people kept trying to follow me and I had to stop it and to stop, people from being able to use my image. And it got crazy, and my producers were wonderful about it in terms of they were supportive and they, did you need anything, and we want to make sure you're safe and we want to make sure you're okay. But you know what I hated about it? Was it made me different. It made me, there was a point where they said, maybe you should park your car at a different lot, and we'll bring a security guard who will drive you and bring you to the studio. We'll, come around from the back way so you don't have to go through the front. And I said to them, I was like, please, I don't want to do that. I said, because then that makes me the Jew. The Jew's the problem. The Jew's the this. The Jew's the that. Look what's happening. Look, all these things now we have to do because you're here. And I didn't want that. I more than anything didn't want that. But I also had to understand that this was a company, and they have insurance needs, and they have certain things that they need to know. They heard about the threat, so they had to take that seriously, and they have to be able to protect themselves as well as me. So for a short time, it was a very uncomfortable situation for me at work. And but they were always amazing by it, amazing about it. I don't want you to think as though they made me, they purposely tried to make me feel uncomfortable. They were trying to make me feel safe. But in doing that, they made me feel different. It's no fault of their own. And I had to be able to understand and kind of accept that. And it was the first time since I was in the Army, since I came out as LGBT, that I ever felt different. That I ever felt like that person. And this was even worse because at least in the Army, I was like, this is my sexuality, this is kind of like who I am, but it's not because of the fact that trope that you hear from history, from the Jew. It's the Jew. It's always the problem with the Jews. And it was such a hard time for me. Fast forward, probably about, I don't know, maybe a month and a half, and people were still talking about it, even though, kind of when it was, once all said and done, it was over, people were still talking about it. And working in a company, like I said, that's media-based, people still talked about it. And the woman who, she and I kind of had that falling out, we'll call it, whatever you want to call it, I still had to see her all the time. And it was hard for me. And what we decided was, the powers that be, that we just weren't going to talk about what it is that, has happened. Let's not bring politics into work, which listen, I never usually did, but this was just kind of something that had happened. Fine, we're going to leave politics out of it. But I almost felt as though she kind of won. So, if you know anything about Israelis, we like to win. We like to be right all the time. We love to be right. And it bothered me every time I saw her, and I was like, she's like really smart, and she bought mine. And it would just bother me that I knew that she felt as though, not that she was right, because in the end, she obviously realized that what I said was true, though until today, she has never, ever apologized or said you were right. Never said anything about it, but it was bothersome to me. And because we decided we weren't going to say anything, we were going to talk about it, it was still bothersome to me because, I'd be in front of the camera and she'd be behind the camera, I'd be watching her. It was just in my mind, it's something in your mind. We don't let things go easily. So I thought to myself, well, how am I going to do something? How am I able to speak without speaking? How am I able to give my message to let her know that she was wrong without actually saying you're wrong? And I thought, well, what can I do that is there, but it's not using my mouth? And it was this. So this says, Am Yisrael, long live the nation of Israel. And, more or less. And what that for me was a way in which, when she was standing there behind the camera, I was like this, or this, or this. I was doing my thing, and she asked, so she knew, because she asked me what it meant. I told her, and she knew, and I lived in Toronto, and it's cold in the winter, and when I was on set, I was on set, why are you in a t-shirt? Because, just because, I was hot, things are happening. So it was my little kind of silent protest. My little silent protest. After that, I did this one. It says, this is a sign. Ein Zion Sophia, which is part of our national anthem, which is part of the Tikva, which means my eyes look to Zion. And that was important for me because the whole issue of Jerusalem, which was happening, which we won't talk about, but again, these are kind of like my silent protests. My mom made me swear after this one, I wasn't doing any more, so I promised I wasn't doing any more. I have my Chamsa, I have my Tikva, and I have my so we're good. But I tell you that story and I laugh about it now because it's funny, but it's very hard to be who you are if you want to be who you are, openly Israeli and openly supportive of Israel, especially in today's world. So that's kind of my story. And I want to touch, and that story brings me to two topics now. Zionism, anti-Zionism, and pinkwashing. I want to talk about those two things. And then I'm going to open the floor up to you guys, because I'm sure you're exhausted. You're already asleep. So, no, I'm kidding. You relax. So Zionism and anti-Zionism. What is Zionism? Zionism, I said at the beginning, it's turned into like this horrible thing. And people say, well, you know, Zionism is racism, Zionism is all these horrible things. And I say anti-Zionism is 100%, without a doubt, no ands, ifs, or buts about it, anti-Semitism. And why do I believe that, and why do I say that? Because if we subscribe to the real, true meaning of Zionism, which is the right of the Jewish people to self-determination in our indigenous homeland, no more, no less, and you say to me, no, you don't have that right, but everybody else does, only the Jews don't, but everybody else does, then you are against the Jews. You are anti-Semitic. It is that simple. And you can try to skew it and flip it and say all the different things that you want to say, but if you adhere to the original and only true meaning of Zionism, then you are anti-Semitic if you say Jews don't have the right to self-determine. So the whole fight with the anti-Zionism isn't racism. The anti-Zionism is, you know, it's okay to be anti-Zionism. I want to make it very clear. To criticize, to be critical of the Israeli government absolutely is justifiable. Israelis are the most critical of our government. I mean, you put 5 Israelis in a room and you have 50 million different topics and ideas about our government. There is not a government, I don't think, that's ever been in government when we were all like, yeah, we love that government. It's never, ever been that way, ever. So, you know, we are critical of our government, and everybody should be, and that's okay. But if you are critical about the right of the Jewish state to exist, then you are anti-Semitic by no uncertain terms. And I refuse to accept anybody who says otherwise. Now, I jump forward from anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism to the idea of, you guys, I'm sure here know what BDS is. Yeah? So boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And it is this movement that claims to be a nonviolent movement that aims to get Israel to do certain things when it comes to the way in which they interact or treat or have policies when it comes to Palestinians. Now, I want to be very clear about something before I say anything else. It is absolutely every person's right, and you should care about people as human beings. Palestinians are human beings. Things that are happening to Palestinians, there are horrible things that are happening to Palestinians within Gaza, and we should care about it. We should care about it because that is humane. We must be humane. But we also have to understand that what is happening in Gaza is 99% in part as a result of the chokehold and the stronghold that an internationally recognized terror organization has on that enclave. Hamas is a terror organization. Hamas is not a government. It's not democratically elected. If they were, they would have elections. None of that. Hamas is a terror organization, as much for Gazans as it is for Israelis. Gazans are not winning with Hamas as the government. Rockets are falling in Gaza as much, well, not as much, but they are falling in Gaza like they are falling in Israel. Because Hamas don't know what they're doing. They're shooting, hoping it lands wherever it lands. Sometimes they fall back. Hamas uses infrastructure. Hamas uses the people of Gaza to hide weapons. Hamas uses hospitals and schools and mosques to hide weapons. Hamas uses the people of Gaza as human shields. And it is a horrible, horrible, gut-wrenching. I talk about it and I get angry because I feel for those people. I feel for the children. I feel for the new generation that can't figure out how to get out of it. And I think, totally off topic, the only way for them to get out of it is it's going to be with the help of other Arab nations to eradicate Hamas and somehow help the Palestinians recreate themselves to a people that they should be. But it's not going to be with Hamas lobbing rockets, trying to kill Israelis. That will never happen because Israel will continue to defend itself, and we should. So BDS, to get back to BDS, the reason that I started talking about that is because BDS likes to say that LGBT rights, the term pinkwashing, everything that we have done, me personally, in the 1990s, I marched in the very first gay pride parade in Israel. And I worked hard to be able to get to that point. And what BDS says is, by using the term pinkwashing, is everything that I have done, all the fighting I did, all the work I did, was for no other reason but to hide what is happening with the Palestinians. That is the most offensive thing I have ever been told by somebody. All the fight, all the work, all the fight that I did, as much for me, LGBT, as an Arab in Israel who's LGBT, as a Muslim in Israel who is LGBT, it is those same rights. We fought for everybody. For them to tell me that is completely not only false, but it is offensive. It's so offensive to me to the core, because it's exactly the opposite of what we've done. We fought and championed and fought for human rights. LGBT rights should be equal rights. So pinkwashing, when someone says to you pinkwashing, you can tell them that I said that that is a made-up term that doesn't exist, because we do not look to hide what's happening. We can love what is happening with the LGBT community to a certain extent, and there's still work to do, by the way, but that in no way means that we have to stop looking what's happening over there. We have two eyes. We can see it there, we can see over there. We're not blind. And we can still champion what's happening, needs to happen over there, as much as we can celebrate what we've accomplished over here. So the term pinkwashing, in my mind, is a complete fallacy. And I hope that that gives you a little bit of a sense in terms of what you need to answer if sometimes people come up with you and talk to you about that term pinkwashing. In terms of LGBT rights and where we are in minorities, Israel still has work to do. Are we 100%, where we want to be? No. Minority rights have not only to do with LGBT, they have to do with other people as well. They have to do with people, for example, who are not considered Jewish by the rabbinate. They could be Jewish, but they could be Reform, or they could be conservative, it could be anything. But in Israel, the way that our government is set up and the way that the laws are, in order to be considered Jewish, if you come into Israel, if you're not, if you're looking to make Aliyah, let's say, for example, and you're looking to do it as law of return, as a Jew, the rabbinate has to be able to say that you are considered to be Jewish. Some Reform Jews in America, and that's where we have a big issue now. Reform Jews, conservative Jews, I don't know exactly where the line ends, but they will say, no, you know what? Even though you were born Jewish, even though you grew up Jewish, all these things, you married Jewish, you didn't do it in an Orthodox way. Do I like that? Absolutely not. Do I think it's something we have to change? Absolutely. Israel is a democracy, first and foremost. A democracy, a free society. We have minorities. We champion minorities. 1.9 million Israeli citizens are Arabs. We have Arabs in the IDF. We have Arabs on our Supreme Court. We have, our third largest. Think about this crazy fact. The third largest government, like the government party. The third largest party in the Knesset is the Joint List, comprised of Arab Israelis who consider themselves to be Palestinian, who on any given day will stand up and say, down with the state of Israel, we hate you, we want Palestine. Who pays their salary? Every other Israeli, because they are citizens. They get to have that. That's their right. They get to say what they want. Free speech. Does it happen in the PA? Get your tongue cut out. Does it happen in Gaza? you're gay, they'll tie your feet to the end of to the back of their motorcycle and drag your dead body through the street. And I say that because in, where was I? Nottingham, a couple days ago, there was a young lady who was LGBT and stood up and said to me that she is LGBT for Hamas. That's like a vegan for meat. I don't know what that means. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And she said, well, listen, she said, you know, we have to champion Palestinian rights for LGBT. Yes, we do. What does that have to do? What does that have to do with a terrorist organization? And it was shocking to me because when she stood up to ask her question, she didn't just stand up, she stood up with a piece of paper and opened it and then started to read it. And I understood at that point that she wasn't there because she had any knowledge. She was there because someone sent her. She was there because someone sent her with a pre-written question that she didn't know how to then respond when I responded back to her. And at some point I felt bad for her because she stood up thinking that she was going to fool me or she was going to trick me into answering a certain way, and she wasn't able to. And I felt bad for her, but she decided to stand up and ask that question, and I couldn't believe it. So minority rights and LGBT rights in Israel, we still have we have a ways to go. We just, again, there was a law that was like it wasn't passed for surrogacy rights in Israel. So in Israel, same-sex couples, we can't use surrogacy services within Israel. I have friends who are married for years. They had to actually do, they have now twins, 2 beautiful boys, but they had to use a surrogate outside of Israel, in Nepal. And it was a sad thing. It was a sad thing that they, Israelis, 2 Israelis, could not have a surrogate within the country of Israel. So yeah, we got to work. There's stuff that we need to still do. There's a lot of work that we still need to do. Marriage equality. People say, oh no, LGBT rights are, no, you can't get married in Israel. Well, let me tell you something. I can't get married in Israel, and I didn't get married in Israel, but my marriage is recognized by Israel, not because of LGBT, or not specifically because of LGBT, but because of civil marriage. So in Israel, marriages need to be under, again, the rabbinate, which is a religious marriage, and you cannot have a civil marriage. So it doesn't only pertain to me, it pertains to if there's some guy who met maybe his girlfriend outside of Israel, or maybe met a non-Jewish girl, he cannot get married to her in Israel. He can go outside of Israel and marry her. He can take a 20-minute flight to Cyprus and marry her and come back with his paper, and they will accept it. But, the rabbinate still has, some control that I think that we need to work on, and there are still things that we need to work on. But think about this, guys. Israel is 71 years old, 72 years old. Where were your countries at 72 years old? Where was Canada at 72 years old? Where was the US at 70 years old? Yes, it was a different time, of course, different time. But where was your countries at these years? We in 71, 72 years have come so far. Give us a second. Like, we're going to get there. There's stuff to do, but we're going to get there. And don't make it harder for us. Help. You want to champion certain things? Do it. Israel has every single thing that you could possibly champion. If you want to champion Palestinians, there are amazing groups in Tel Aviv, in Jaffa in particular, which I took a trip this year to, the Shimon Peres Peace Center in Jaffa. An amazing place that looks to bridge Palestinians and Israelis in the most interesting and simple ways. They bring children to play football, or they do, just kind of like regular things that every kid, every regular kid does. And they do it in, so instead of, with all the protests and all that stuff, if you really want to make a difference, because Israel is not going anywhere, so if you want to make a difference, but do it in a way that's going to be constructive and is actually going to work, rather than just making yourself seem like that girl, ignorant. So I'm going to stop there, guys, because I don't want to talk your ears off, and I want to open up the floor to you guys to ask your questions. And anybody have a question?
Just put up your hands and we'll kind of go in order.
Sure.
Give Shai plenty of time to answer.
Yeah.
If you want to follow up and if you didn't answer something, just
I'm
stick
here.
up your hand. And also, by the way, we were at a camera conference in the summer. We asked them some hell of questions. And
Nottingham was worse. I got some good ones there. So.
He gets better with the tough questions. So please do ask him the stuff that you like. And
nothing scares me. So let's have it.
Okay, there are 2 Palestinians. Sure, you're familiar with the word Basamid.
Yep.
And also Madar Zoran. Their way forward, the solution to peace is through economic prosperity. Any opinions on
I absolutely agree. Listen, do you guys know SodaStream? Yeah. So SodaStream is a company that I absolutely love. If you don't follow them, you must follow them because they do exactly what you're talking about. So SodaStream is like a bubbly water company. You make bubbly water with a machine, and it was I believe it was a British company at the very beginning in the 80s, and then it was sold into Israel. And this summer, when I went back and I took a media tour with me, we went to the SodaStream factory because the SodaStream factory has a very interesting history. It used to be in the West Bank. The factory used to be in the West Bank. And what was amazing about SodaStream is it was almost called like the coexistence place in Israel, because you would go there and it didn't matter if you were Palestinian, Israeli, Muslim, Jewish, Christian, whatever. Equal pay for equal work. Didn't matter if you're a man, if you were a woman. If you go to the factory, they have prayer rooms for Muslims. They have halal kitchens for Muslims. They have Jewish places. It's just this amazing place. It's almost like this world within Israel. And it was such an amazing place because Palestinian economy it's a horrible economy. The Palestinian economy is probably one of the worst. And what people do not understand is BDS in no way affects the economy of Israel. In fact, Israel's economy is booming. Our tourism is booming. You know, Israel is not being affected by BDS other than the fact that we need to fight it. Who's being affected by BDS? The Palestinians. That's who's losing economically in BDS. And I'll give you an example, and I come back to SodaStream. So because it was in the West Bank, the factory was in the West Bank, BDS said, nope, we want the factory out of the West Bank, no protesting, we get out. Didn't matter. That what was going to happen was those Palestinians who were being hired by SodaStream to work and were making a living wage were no longer going to be able to have jobs. BDS didn't care about that. They cared about not having the factory in the West Bank. So at the end of the day, I mean, he didn't have to. I know Danny, the owner of BDS, the CEO. He's a wonderful guy. And he didn't have to move, but he thought, you know what? He's like, if we're trying to really create this coexistence, there's no real reason that we have to be there. I'll move the factory into, now it's close to Beersheba, which is in the south part of Israel. And when we went there, you know, he talked to us and he spoke to us, and he said, for a very long time, and this has to do with security reasons, it's not super easy for every Palestinian to get a work visa to come work into Israel. In the West Bank, it's fine, but in Israel, obviously, because you're crossing into a sovereign country. And they didn't have to worry about that when they were working for SodaStream in the West Bank, but now they have to. And he had a horrible time trying to get all the people, he didn't want to even lose one, all the people to get work visas. He went to the top. He went to Netanyahu, and he, at the end of the day, I don't know if he got all of them, but he got most of them. And when we were there, what was so amazing about it was he said to us, you know what, I don't want you guys to feel as though I'm bringing you on a tour and like kind of guiding you where to look. We did the tour of the actual factory itself, which is a really interesting factory. If you're ever there, you should definitely go. But he said, go be about yourself. The factory ends at that gate, and at that gate, and at that border, and at that border. He was like, go around, talk to whoever you want. And I thought, well, that's kind of like brazen. I was like, you know, you never know what somebody's going to say. Maybe they hate you, maybe they whatever. It was amazing. It was amazing to see the love and the coexistence and the appreciation and the ability of these Palestinians who otherwise would not have a working wage, Palestinians who would otherwise not have a home, Palestinians who would otherwise not have food on their table, say that, thank God for this man, thank God for Israeli ingenuity, and thank God for being able to work for an Israeli company.
Can I just say, BDS is like cutting off the noses of Palestinians despite Israel.
I am with you. I am with you. You are absolutely correct, and I appreciate that you understand that, because so few people do. And it's such a horrible thing, and I agree with him. Economically, if we can bring the Palestinian economy to where it needs to be, yes. And there are two things that need to happen in order for that to happen. Fatah and Hamas have to be removed, because Hamas, right now, the way that it is, do you know how many billions of dollars have gone to Gaza? If all of the money that's ever gone to Gaza actually went to Gazans, went to infrastructure, went to hospitals, went to education, went to water, went to all those things, Gaza would be what it was promised to be, which was the Singapore of the Middle East. Gaza is a horrible place, for the most part, a horrible place. My parents, in my living memory, I remember my parents used to be able to go, before 2005, go to Gaza. They had friends in Gaza, Arab friends who lived in Gaza. They would go for Shabbat, they would have coffee. Yes, Israel was there. Yes, Israel was controlling the land. But there was this coexistence that I understand that a lot of people didn't want. And Israel said, fine. 2005, see ya, they left. Not only did they leave, they said everything that is in Gaza, infrastructure, agriculture, greenhouses, everything, we are going to leave for you, and we're going to do one better. We're going to educate you how to be self-sufficient. We are going to give you all the tools so you will be self-sufficient. What did they do? Burnt it to the ground because they wanted to have nothing to do with Israel. Okay, but look at where you are now. Like, there has to be a point when you put the hate that's kind of ingrained in you aside, and say, these are the facts on the ground. This is where we are. We could be, in 1948, when the partition was made, if the Palestinian, at that time it wasn't the Palestinians, it was the Arabs. If the Arabs had done exactly as the Jews had done, we would have two beautiful states side by side, everything would be great. But what did they do? They decided not to. They decided, no, we don't want any Jews, we're gonna attack. Listen, I'm with you. Economy, it's the way to do it. It's the way to do it. But it cannot be siphoned through the governments that are there now, because the money never gets to where it needs to be.
But we do have a Palestinian state. It was created with 77% of the land of the British Mandate.
I know. It's called Jordan. No, I know that. You know, a lot of people don't know that. So for some of you who don't know that, the original partition was, of course, everything from the west of the river, from the west of the river was Jewish. Everything from the east of the river was going to be Arab. So what was then Transjordan, now Jordan, was supposed to be the Arab state. What was west was Palestine, was supposed to be the Jewish state. In the end, even part of the Jewish state became the Arab state, and Jews still said fine. They just wanted to be able to self-determine. This is where we are. Yeah, listen, I think the Palestinians live under their own government. They live under the Palestinian Authority. They have elections-ish. I mean, you know, their prime minister is now the 14th year of his 4-year term. The Gaza has Hamas, is their government. So yes, I do think that they should be under their own governments, 100%. And I don't think that the governments that they have now are the right governments. But it's very important when we talk about defining a people. Words matter. And the term Palestinian, as it refers to an Arab people today, is a term that was only started to be used in 1964 by Yasser Arafat. Before that, Arabs were Arabs, Jews were Jews. Well, Jews were Israelis by that time, but in pre-1948, Arabs were Arabs, Jews were the Palestinians. It's not a coincidence that during the Holocaust they were saying Jews go back to Palestine. There was a reason that they were saying that. Now they say Jews leave Palestine. I mean, Jews just don't know where to go anymore. So at some point, we have to be able to say, let's understand what the history was. The history is very simple. Pre-1948, Palestinians, that term, for the most part, not all, but for the most part, referred to Jews. If you look at the athletic teams that were in Palestine at that time, if you look at the papers, if you look at, you know, when I'm sorry? Yeah, yes, all Jewish. If you look at the name, you can go on, you can look at the football team that was in Palestine, you look at the names, they were all Jewish. It was, with the Star of David, it was a Jewish thing. You know, the term then became used by Yasser Arafat in 1964 to define the Arab population, which is fine. But what it has done is it's created this false narrative that they were always this people that were there. The Jews were also always there. So to say the Palestinians are just Arabs is factually incorrect, right? So I agree with you. I think that they should have a right to self-determination. I think that they should have their own state. I'm a proponent of a two-state solution. Listen, ideologically, I grew up in a home where it was like, nope, Israel is Israel. Ideologically. I understand. Every Israeli understands. that the facts on the ground are there is a population that lives next to us, and we have to be able to give them the rights to be able to do the things that they need to do, as long as they are doing it not in a way to attack us. You know what I mean? So if you want to live peacefully next to me, I will promise you this. The day the Palestinians say, today we are getting up, we are kicking out of our government, we want to live peacefully side by side with Israel, Israel will be the first country to say we will give you money, we will give you help, we will help you be the country you want to be. Sorry, say again? Like what? No, my family lives not in Gaza, not right outside of Gaza, but close to Ashkelon. I trust what I see on camera. When I watch it, or when I'm at home and I watch them flying over my head, I mean, I trust what I see with my eyes. You know what I mean? Israeli state media? I mean, Israel is a democracy, right? So there is right wing. Yeah, so there's right wing media. Listen, media today is no longer journalism is certainly no longer what it used to be. It used to be who, what, where, when, why, how, done, right? No opinion. Now there's a spin on everything. I know CNN this way, Fox is this way, BBC is this way, Sky News is this way. I know these things. So you have to be, yes, you should be critical. I mean, you should look at things through the eyes of not just I'm going to accept what it is that I see. Look at it, and you need to research it. But I would ask you, and I would implore you to say, let me ask people who are there living it. So ask Gazans as much as you should ask Israelis, but listen to what Israelis are saying to you. And I can tell you, where my family is from is Moshav Zabdiel. It's Moshav. It's outside of, not very far from Ashkelon, in Lachish area. You know, when I was in, I think it was in Glasgow, I can't remember what day it was, that the rockets started falling again. I have on my phone the Red Alert app, because most Israelis do. So, you know, if you're at home, you need to hear it. You don't hear the sirens. My phone would not stop. My watch would not stop. Like literally, I couldn't stop talking. I had to stop talking because it was just, you know. Yes.
From the IDF.
Sure.
All arms yeah. But you think that given your upbringing and your view,
yeah.
It's difficult to see.
No, I mean, I don't see it the same, but I can understand what they say. And, you know, I don't like to use this term because I think it makes something sound a little bit disingenuous, but, you know, so where my moshav is it's very close to Ashkelon, but also very close, probably about Israel's not very big, but it's probably about a 15-minute drive from a place called Kfar Ibna, which is a Palestinian village in the West Bank. And the Mukhtar, which is like the mayor, I guess, of the village, an older gentleman who's lived his entire life from before the reestablishment of the state until today. His son, during my army service, his son and I became friends because I met him through my army service, and we just became friends. His father is one of the most brilliant minds I have ever in my life met, and he's still to today, he's still alive, and he still tells me, he's like, Shai, he's like, what's happening is completely, it doesn't have to be this. It'd be so much easier. It's the radicals on this side and the radicals on this side that are making it the problem that it is. It would be so much easier if we just stopped for a second and came a little bit more like this. Now, you can still have your state of Israel. You can still have your Palestine. And they don't have to be enemies if the ideology that is so fueling so much of that hate never existed. Okay, so that's an interesting question, because in 1948 to 1967, Israel was not in the West Bank or in Gaza. Not one Israeli was in the West Bank or in Gaza. So I always like to throw it back to people and say, so how come a Palestinian state was never established? If it was all about being in that land as it is, no more, no less, why was the state never established? And nobody never knows how to answer that question. It's always this thing that stumps everybody. And what's interesting or problematic about it is in 1967, when the Six-Day War happened, the reason that Israel today is in the West Bank is because we then understood that those borders were not defensible. We couldn't defend those borders. That's why the Six-Day War happened. The way that the Six-Day War happened made us understand that those borders, I think it's 9 or 6 kilometers. If we went back to the borders the way that they were in 1967, it would be 9 kilometers from the West Bank to the Mediterranean Sea. 9 kilometers. That's impossible to defend, especially when you're surrounded by countries that are looking at every single moment to annihilate you openly, they say it. So you can't defend that. So what's going to have to happen is not going to go back to those borders. What's going to have to happen, am I going over my time? Okay, no. What's going to have to happen is, I can talk about this. What's going to have to happen is we're going to have land swaps. And that's something that the Palestinians understand. Every Palestinian, the Palestinian leadership has understood that. The sad thing about it is, 2008, the last time there was a deal that was offered by Israel to the Palestinians, it was offered with 97% of what the Palestinians wanted, including a capital in East Jerusalem. They said no. Nobody knows why. Yes, Mahmoud Abbas, until today, his reasoning, which I cannot figure out, and I don't know how the world doesn't laugh at him, says he didn't have a map to look at that point, because he wanted to see it on the map. At that point, he didn't have a map, so he said no. Is that a mind of a well person? I don't know. But it's ridiculous. And Israel at some point has to say, we are definitely not going to go back to indefensible borders. So we have to figure out a way to make sure that you have the land that that you feel that is yours, but that is also defensible for us. Defense is first and foremost. So in Israel, the interesting thing about Israel is we are very liberal when it comes to social issues, but we are very conservative when it comes to security. And security is always going to be the one that sits above everything, because if there's no security, nothing else can happen. That's why we are where we are today with our governments. No government has ever been able to say, we will secure you as much as you need to be secure, but also have the social kind of things that you need to have. And it's kind of like where we're stuck right now. So, yeah, yeah. I just want to give other people an opportunity. Doesn't it?
Would you say that the term
Yeah.
would you say
No. No, it's not, because in order for apartheid state to exist, you have to have one government who deals with, or two separate sets of laws for two separate sets of people. The Palestinians have their own government. They're governed by the PA. They're not governed by Israel. Gazans are governed by Hamas. They're not governed by Israel. I'm sorry? What do you mean? Well, Israel recognizes it. Yeah. I mean, they don't accept Hamas as legitimate, but they recognize it. The PA is recognized by Israel as the Palestinian government. Hamas is not legitimate to anybody, really, except for people who support terror. But yeah. Good. All right. You're welcome. Yes.
When Islamic Jihad and Hamas come out and say that 80% of those who were dispatched at the Great Return riot.
Yeah.
Why doesn't the rest of the world believe Hamas and Islamic Jihad, that these guys are armed members of terrorist organization as recognized by everybody? How do you explain to people like